Okay, I'll do a quick intro. My name's Jan Kodabash. I work for Universal Technology Solutions. I'm a network engineer. I've been a network engineer during my life in IT, and for most of the day, or most of my time, I work with my clients and customers globally, helping them solve problems and challenges they see with their technology. That's the bit I enjoy the most. That's me. Matt?
Hi, Matt Leonards. I'm the owner of Fortis Information Security, and I have a background from networks through to network security, then going into information security, and then about 6 years ago set up Fortis to help other businesses become more secure.
Okay. Yeah, and Matt, we've worked before, or at least I've been in discussions previously to this, so it was good for you to agree to come on. And I think you're well placed to discuss this topic, which is around the CISO role. And I thought it was interesting because to look at the CISO role in itself, from a networking perspective, but also security, but look how it's evolved over, say, the last, say, 15 years or so. I think you've probably seen a lot of changes. Some of the things I'd like to capture, you've been in there firsthand, and what changes you've seen, and maybe possibly we'll get onto what changes should we expect. So
let's for sure.
Yeah, I know. So we've usually got like a half-hour slot, and we usually run over, but I'm sure we'll cover most of the things that we want. So maybe
Okay.
So for those who don't know, what's a CISO? And I know most people do know, but just at a high level, what is your kind of objective when you go somewhere as a CISO?
It's really to help the business to become more secure. Ultimately, that's what it's about. It's about risk management within the organization to avoid potential security issues for the business, and that helps to protect the business, to defend the business, defend the people within the business as well, to protect the brand of the business too. So mostly I'd say it's reducing information security risk. I think that really is the balance that a CISO offers within an organization.
Right. And from a network perspective, I've been in an say, for example, in an architecture role or even in an engineering role. We often come about and have discussions with CISO or security team. Now, if we go back, say, 10 years, I would say, or say 15 years even, I would say that that tier was part or came under an umbrella of just like network services. There was a firewall team, networking team, kind of all came out under, say, like a CTO role. I don't think there was a concept of a CISO back then, or not many places had that. It all came under that, and that kind of changed as exposures and security was highlighted even more. Yeah. Did you see? Were you part of that kind of shift?
Yes. Yeah, it was. Gosh, how did it work back in 2000-ish? It was more around the CTO had a person within the team who's responsible and accountable for security. And typically, when I say security here, I less so physical security, more so information or cybersecurity, as it kind of the term kind of moved on as people moved from, I guess, paper to digital. And we used to have a number of operations people. It was more NOC in those days rather than SOC, as often we have both today, and integrated as well. And then you had security people. Typically, they were people who had moved from sysadmins or interesting things like being DNS admins, and they knew a lot about compute and servers and stuff like that. And then they became the person that you go to if you had any kind of security challenges. And over the last 20 years, it's matured greatly as the importance of a digital infrastructure has become imperative, really, for modern businesses to operate effectively.
Yeah. And I think, would you agree then that as we started to see more compliance or security compliance and regulatory compliance, that kind of elevated the need for a CISO role to be there, because companies then were being exposed a lot more. There was reputational damage being caused, so and that had monetary implications or commercial implications and penalties. Do you think that was a big driver then? I think that when that started happening, I think that's when I started seeing more CISOs around and interacting more with that, because it was more important.
The impact to the business can be huge when it comes to losing at security, or organizations that are there to exploit your security would actually impact your business hugely. Therefore, the C-suite need to have someone in the organization that is ultimately accountable. And when you look at the difference of accountability for different roles within an organization, you can see that whether they're called a CISO or head of security or global head of security, you kind of get to see the differing priorities that a CISO would have, that therefore the managing director, CEO or CIO can kind of lean on as a person to go to for all security matters. And then having that reporting capability, which is one of the challenges a CISO has, back into the board to make it not technical, but for appropriate for the audience of board members. So you definitely, it's great to have an individual that is accountable for security, and it just simplifies the structure within a business to have that. And whether that person reports to the board or reports to the CIO, or we've seen ones as well to the CTO, the influence is obviously diluted a bit. If you think CIO typically has different priorities than a CISO, CISO is about reducing risk. Primarily, there's obviously other drivers in there, but the CIO is about operational efficiencies and productivities within the organization. So there is a slight conflict there, but only a minor one, because really any CISO, that's probably their number 2 priority as well, is increasing those operational efficiencies securely, I guess, is the key.
And one of the points you made there about when a CISO or head of security is much more accountable for the compliance and the regulatory area for security, possibly that filters down across the security stack. It probably is not as apparent in, say, network engineering, and so I think sometimes that's when I'm not saying they clash, but that's where there are a little bit of differences from the two kind of teams. One has to be a lot more aware of, I suppose, compliance and risk in particular. And I think let me ask you, when do you think, or how is the best way to overlay that? Because they are kind of now separate to two tiers. For example, a network engineering approach to a solution could be, functionality and capability, and often runs down that track until security have a look at it, or get involved. There's no consideration for risk or compliance, and it could kind of, so where have you seen that work? I'll give you an example where I think it hasn't worked, but where do you think that's worked? How could it work a lot better, do you think?
I guess it very much depends on how the organization grasps security. and see security as something that's going to help to enable, in your kind of environment, talking about networks, security is usually brought in quite late on, because networking traditionally is technology that is to allow everyone to get everywhere as a foundational service, whereas security is how do we do that securely, such that you have segmentation, such that you have the ability to ensure certain aspects of your business can't be reached by everyone, such that the information that is consumed via a network as that foundational service stops people from accessing data that they shouldn't be able to access, stops people from exfiltrating data that they shouldn't be able to take out of an organization. So and this goes for all projects really, it means that the security team really should have an idea about enabling the business, but enabling them securely and helping them to do things securely, such that projects run to time. So the sooner you get involved with the security team, the better. Then you've got the fact that we often get a lot of pen testing requests, and they come very much at the last minute, because the way the project's been organized, perhaps it hasn't been seen that from a compliance perspective, certain projects with certain categories of or classifications of information need to then have a pen test to get that security assurance. So there's things that are strong indicators that these things happen and aren't baked into the project at the start. But I don't think it's just for networks. I think it's for the majority of projects, whether it's implementing a new CRM or it's having some kind of new cloud service being brought online. The security people typically get brought in when they're remembered. We've got to get the security people involved, and then it's playing catch up, because the security team, typically what we want to do is to help the business to operate and to say yes, and this is how we should do it for it to become secure. And those are the kind of things that the security team should be getting involved in, but with that pragmatic and positive security.
So that's really a point I wanted to cover, which is it depends on the culture of the organization. However, there was a post I did actually, which said actually security is everyone's responsibility. Now, just because you've got those silos, you've got to consider is if there's an organization that the culture isn't really security focused, the people who are, whoever it is, if it's network engineers, project engineers, or even procurement, should have that security cap on, just to consider everything. It's not someone else's problem. And if you've got that, you'll know how to engage, or at least ask, well, look, is this going to be a security risk? Should I bring someone in at this stage? I think that helps. So rather than just rely on maybe a governance approach that isn't that robust, individuals are really responsible. And one of the things I always say to network engineers is, when you're looking at a solution, look at it from all angles. I think that helps. But another point that you made was security teams being, or security tiers being an enabler. What you don't want, and that applies for everyone. You don't want cycles going in and blocking things. You want to apply security or any other technology and always think, how can we enable work to get done? Because it's so easy to say, no, you can't do it. But it's a little bit more difficult. It requires a lot of thought, and this is where people's money's earned, is by saying, look, we should be doing this. This is how we should be doing it. And the reason we should be doing it is because of this. But we can mitigate. That's where the money's made. Absolutely. Saying no is an easy job. But that's where good security teams, they enable work to continue. And I just want to,
much so.
I look at our policies sometimes because I'll, even though I'm not generally aligned to security, but I'll look at security policies and I can see when they're not enablers and when they just actually have a process in there to allow work to carry on. So that was one thing.
That's, for me, that's, security needs to help the business, not to stop the business. The business is there to deliver what it is that the mission of that business is. And very rarely, unless it's a security company, of course, does security even come into it. So security is very much an enabler for the organization and the business. And sometimes, of course, it's never a perfect world. I don't think we should expect to have a perfect world, and that runs into the business as well. So you will be brought in late, and that ideally isn't the normal operation, but it is pretty usual to see that. So try and approach it with a positive attitude, in that the business is there, you're trying to help to make the business more secure, and you can't make the business more secure just by saying no. You need to have a more enlightened view for security and recognize your role in the organization is to help the business bring products to market. It's to help to achieve time to bringing that product to the market, to help to accelerate it, see what a minimum viable product might be. And you can see minimum viable security as well. But then make your list, or whatever people call a list these days, of things that can't be done now that should be done in the future. And then you make an intelligent choice as a project team to say, right, we can do this now. There's very little impact to the time to market for the product. This is what we should do to then mitigate major elements of risk. And then this is what we should be doing in the future to help to really knuckle down on the security. And of course, there are certain elements that might be glaringly obvious that if we put this out now, this is going to be a major problem. And that shouldn't be the security person's choice. The security person should be the intelligent person in the project to be able to advise the project team on what are the potential implications. And then it's for the project team to decide what we do, what we don't do, based around the input from that positive team member.
Yeah. No, so it's good. We just covered a couple of points there, and we went through just this at the start, how the CISO role came about, or the importance of security that drove that. But now, if we kind of look at and get your take on that change, that shift change now, maybe in the last, say, 3 years, what are you seeing that's been, or has there been, or particularly in the last 2 years, maybe, what's been significant, or what are you getting called in for that has been different from before?
I think the big one in reality, I know everyone talks about AI. There's an element. I would say bigger than that. Still, AI is definitely on there now. Is around cloud security. The prevalence and growth of SaaS-based applications to help a business to operate effectively without infrastructure is massive, and it continues to grow at a huge pace. And it's brilliant that this is happening, but from a security perspective, getting that cloud security piece working is, I would say, probably one of the highest priorities within an organization. And in this, I count this as an element of risk management, which is the overall wrap for security. But, I'm thinking probably not as exciting as AI, maybe, but cloud security.
Okay, that's interesting. So, is that more a case of now you're looking at providing security, whereas previously it was providing security across infrastructure and transactions that you own or an organization owned and managed? Now you're looking at providing that same capability or risk management over infrastructure that's not necessarily yours, or transactions taking place that is in infrastructure you don't actually own or have as much control over. Is that where the biggest difference is?
I think,
and how? Yeah, go on.
I think what it comes down to is, where is it that attackers want to get? What is it that they want to achieve? What are the potential downsides to your business? And a lot of it comes from seeking information. And if you think about where that information is held, a lot of it these days is based in SaaS applications and cloud applications. If you look at Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, etc., a lot of core data is held in these locations. And then, separately, of course, you've got the PaaS and IaaS type of infrastructures as well, that replace the traditional data center. So you've got those. So it's not forgetting those elements, but very much depending on your business type, a lot of the information is found in 365, Workspace, etc. So it's securing those type of SaaS applications. Finance tools now, a lot of those are based around SaaS applications as well. So it's looking at things that attackers are going to go for, and it's not discounting the risk of ransomware and things like that to the endpoint through phishing attacks, etc. But typically, it's looking at the route in that attackers will take to try and access that cloud stored data.
So one of the things, when I've had to look or been engaged at looking at this type of scenario where a company A has got transactions that occur in the cloud and maybe some on-prem as well, and there's some transaction between them.
Yeah.
Cloud security, or the capabilities within cloud security compared to, say, native or legacy, I'd call it, capabilities, they're quite granular. There's one of the things that cloud provides, especially from a security standpoint, it gives you a very granular control of down to even a process level. So when you look at it that way, you think, well, we've got a lot more ability to control the cloud than we have even on-prem, or some of the appliances we use on-prem. So would you argue that it's sometimes the reluctance of teams or security teams not kind of understanding that capability and kind of stopping the two talking, if you like? What I found is that, look, there is a lot of capability in the cloud, how we can secure it a lot more than we can even on-prem. So we could kind of not necessarily promote, but take on some of those practices and allow. But there's a little bit of a reluctance. I think there is a big learning curve, and that's part of it. Some security teams see it as no. But once that learning curve is understood, or say, for example, a team or a security team that understands that, are you seeing that part where there's not less understanding of what can be exposed in the cloud?
When I consider the functionality of security kind of previously, from a risk management, identity access management, SecOps, incident management, preventing threats, detecting threats, you still get all those kind of functional elements within the cloud environment. And it's very dependent on the specifics, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software as a service type of cloud activities. And it's different, but if you think about the potential impact now for one person's credential compromise, or having their MFA session cookie stolen and replayed, for example, so attackers can bypass MFA and then access that data. Now, if you've set up your role-based access control, it contains it in a very kind of like a slice of cake. You don't get to eat the whole cake, but you can see a slice of cake. And ideally, that slice of cake, once it's been compromised, is the smallest slice of cake you could ever eat. But at the same time, when you look at things that you want to get, what's the terminology, like information advantage, you want to enable people by giving them the right information at the right time out of the masses of information an organization might hold, then it's very hard to do that, because if you open all the doors, then everyone can get everywhere. But in reality, you just want the people to see the data that they need to do their jobs at that moment in time, and then close it down afterwards, such that even if they're a very good employee, have done all the security training and things like that, and looking at your security tools, people are not always going to do what you want to do. And very much when you look back, you think, oh, if only we'd done this, oh, if only we'd done that. And it's very hard to do it, because you do want to empower people in the organization to have the tools, the data, the access that they need to do their job, but nothing more. And then you want to close that hole after the person's been able to use that data, such as when their accounts potentially get compromised, depending on their access to data. You want it to be as minimal as quickly as minimal as possible. So it's a hard one, and there's no great, but there are tools that are helping to do compliance, continuous compliance and auditing, because it's not a massive change control process these days. Whereas, to get access to new data, previously it was, a big project, but now it's not. It's a couple of clicks of the mouse. And if someone, potentially a compromised insider, something, probably not malicious. I like to think that people wouldn't normally try and do these things, but maybe a mistake. Then if you've got continuous compliance, automated continuous compliance of your security configuration and data sharing in all of your plethora of cloud platforms, then those type of things can really help to prevent those mistakes being made.
But then, can I ask then how? So some of those things that you mentioned, that applies even to kind of before. How in particular, or what is it particular about the cloud that has increased that, or added that to the top of the agenda now? Are they building it different? Is the approach different? I've got my views on this again. From my perspective, I think how cloud was developed as a new technology, it was just a case of initially we'll go and play around a little bit, build, and it was like we said before, security came in afterwards and started to look at, oh, actually, you know what, there's a few compromises, because cloud was always to be an enabler. Yeah, one of the things, enabler for building things, making it quick, automated, and it did that. However, again, I think that amongst the mix, security got left behind a little bit. Do you think that's why it's looking at, it's not because we're doing anything differently, it's just that, again, it's coming in, security have been looking at it differently?
I think it's the number and the adoption of cloud is massive throughout the organization. For example, you'll have in your legal team, you'll probably have 3 or 4 unique cloud platforms that they use. If you look at human resources, they'll probably have a couple of cloud platforms. If you look at your software development teams, they'll have a couple of cloud platforms. The whole business will have 1 or 2 cloud platforms that they use as users or admins. So you've just got so many of them, and they're coming on all the time. So how do you manage governance and security across all of them? If you look at the number of SaaS providers out there for the variety of service that organizations need now, it's just huge. So
Yeah.
How do you measure that? How do you normalize that against the security requirements? So if you look at, it's kind of like your security is your abstraction layer. So you get loads of different cloud platforms across the top. You have your security abstraction layer, and then you have the individual ways to configure all of those different cloud platforms such that you meet your security baseline for cloud services. It's finding the right tweaks, configuration elements for all of those cloud platforms that often do it in their own way. There are things like single sign-on and having MFA again as an abstraction layer to be able to have that and have all of your cloud APIs going into them, etc. So those are the way you kind of manage and scale it. But the availability of attack vectors, once you're in the cloud or once you're in an organization's SaaS cloud, it's very hard to see those and amplify those weak signals from a security operations perspective to identify that you've actually got a cyber incident taking place in one of your cloud platforms. So it's really multifaceted, quick moving. You often don't find out about new organizations bringing on a new cloud service until very late in the day. So that's why I just think it's definitely a great thing that we have these opportunities in business to have it. It's just quite hard to scale from a security team and then a security operations team to be able to identify if a cloud account has actually been compromised.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I think from my perspective, it is down to the initial adoption. It has to be like if security are involved or if there is but it's very difficult because it's often seen as adding all of these kind of considerations at the beginning of taking on something looks like it is a blocker. However, a slow approach initially, or just in an initial period of adopting anything, will give you a lot more speed later on and agility in whatever solution you do. It's just that sometimes we take on the speed of not looking at it in too much detail in the beginning, and we kind of hinder ourselves later on. I think it's part of that.
Yeah,
I'm running over a little bit, but there's one more that was. You mentioned AI, and AI, similar to say when social media came out. But have you been involved in, or how do you put together a policy around AI security, or does it come under standard policy? Have you had to look at AI completely different, and now just like we had social media policies, is there an AI policy that people are adopting now? Security. I'm talking about.
It's good to separate it out because a lot of AI details come down to privacy as well. So there's usually, it's like compliance. Compliance is usually a different function in the organization, and security compliance is one element of the larger compliance function. It's the same when working with AI and privacy. The security team provide the approaches to segregating data within an AI platform, and it depends very much on what the type of requirement for the AI function is within the business, because obviously you can use AI for loads of different functions. But if you look at the one that is to enable businesses to become more effective, whether it's, I don't know, writing proposals, helping customer feedback, checking your coding and things like that, so you can bring your internal products faster to market, those type of things. It's kind of trying to, I guess, one of the foundational things with AI is looking at law and regulation around the type of data that you're hoping to leverage your AI to sift through and create outputs, actionable outputs from it. I think you're then looking at data governance, and this is where privacy comes in as well, such that people can only see the data that they're supposed to use, even if they're leveraging an AI to compile that information and feedback. So it's trying to provide that knowledge and segmentation as well. Obviously, keeping that data internally as well is one of the things to make sure that it's not going upstream and you're losing some of that intellectual property through just people being people. So it's kind of looking at those type of capabilities. And there are AI capabilities now where, like with private data stores and private cloud and things like that, you've got similar kind of constructs that your organizational data and services can be within a certain cloud tenant, and the AI can only look within that cloud tenant and can't pass any of that data or information or questions upstream to a more public AI. So there are ways to do that, and cryptography, it is a capability as well. I know quantum computing is coming along as well to try and damage that, make it even harder, but we'll get there in the future, I'm sure. So there's lots of things around AI that an organization can do to responsibly adopt AI from a privacy and security perspective.
Right. So those two things we just touched on, which was AI and compliance, and also cloud, which have been big shifts. They're all enablers for companies. They're all enablers for smaller startups to now take on a lot more, because it makes it a lot easier for them. This is where I guess a virtual CISO, or whatever you want to call it, that capability, some of them are smaller companies, don't have that. And maybe if you can talk about a little bit, where I know you guys do this quite a bit,
we do,
but how they can actually enable themselves to still have that level of compliance and risk consideration without actually having a single person, taking on that role. These are small companies that maybe operate 100 people or less, but still manage to take on quite a lot of work, because now you've got a lot of enablers for them.
Yeah, absolutely. The benefits are that you're getting years of experience distilled down to a cost which is much smaller than it would be to hire that person full time. And the challenges, there's obviously lots of challenges with hiring as well to make sure you've got the right person. Sometimes it's good when people leave because it gives you the opportunity to get a different viewpoint. So, but at the same time, it's quite difficult for organizations as well, because you've got to fill that gap and you've got to retain continuity. So it's pros and cons, but the virtual CISO helps to fill that gap and fill that void. And you get different kind of levels of virtual CISO as well. People think of virtual CISOs as a chief information security officer, and often certain organizations, depending on the level of their evolution, they don't need directors, they need doers. And if you are a CISO, typically you're more on the directing other people, directing other teams to do things, as opposed to like a virtual CISO that's actually perhaps a doer as well. So mostly on the GRC side, the governance, risk and compliance side still, rather than tweaking technical controls. That's still probably the realm of security architecture, security engineering type of functions. But typically you'll see the information security officer coming in, providing shining a light on things that are a major risk to the organization that they just didn't realize was a major risk previously, and therefore being able to come up with plans to mitigate that risk and reduce that risk for the organization. So there's a lot of value for the CISO, and especially in a fragmented service where it just reduces the cost to have that type of that brain on your payroll.
And I think you talked about the operational elements and the benefits they can. It's also when you're looking to expand and when you're looking, whether it's even smaller companies acquire or take on new business, with the compliance required or documentation required, there's a lot of I guess concentration on security questions, on security. Are you compliant with certain capabilities? That part can sometimes take you so long, or you're not. Some people are answering these questions who are not really qualified to answer them, and so the virtual CISO, I think, is a big enabler for that as well. And it's a good way of getting some of that done, or at least understanding that we've got someone who can handle that for us, who's on our side and can help us through it. I think that part.
Yeah. If you look at third-party risk and M&A, working with third parties, you often need a kind of surge resource to be able to cope with those questionnaires of doom that come out with unlimited amounts of curious questions into your footprint for how you're dealing with security in the business. And you're absolutely right that often the recipients of that are people that work in a compliance team, but often not a security function. So they interpret the questions, the person filling them out, and then the recipient interprets the answers to the questions in different ways. So having that kind of virtual CISO function really does help in those surges to make sure that, one, the organization answering the questionnaire, and this can be a digital questionnaire as well these days. There are some really good digital platforms out there that do this. SaaS platforms, of course. So we see those coming through, and an intelligent recipient can read into the answers to the questions and think, yeah, they certainly didn't understand the question here. We need to go and clarify this. Or at least put some form of mitigation in there and say, well, for this organization, that's a really low risk. So we don't need to do it at the front end of the contract. But as we work through the contract, we'll ask for a little bit more detail about this, because they don't clearly understand what our risk is around that question being posed and their answer to it.
Yeah, and just to drill a little bit deeper into how that actually works, that could go from a set number of days or even once a month type of scenario, but at least you've got that person you could lean on for those type of questions. So I think that's a good thing for people to be aware of from a virtual CISO, if they ever hear that type of term, how that actually pans out. I think it's good. It's a good way of investigating.
It is.
So,
and it's important as well, I think, that organizations don't think of the virtual CISO just as a chief information security officer. It can be the equivalent of an information security manager as well, information security risk and compliance manager. It can be lower functions as well, not just having that chief level person.
Right. Okay. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. I think we didn't manage to cover everything, but I think we got a good bit of it to talk about for people to listen to. But I'd like to just ask you a couple of things before we kind of finish. For maybe people who are looking at this and say, for example, from your perspective, are there any particular, say, go-to websites that you look to for people on their way to kind of, some of the younger guys here who are looking to progress to, say, a CISO or even, senior security guys? What kind of website would you kind of direct them to just find out more?
Gosh, I think there's different elements. There's training. Learn how to use Google. I think you'd be hard pressed to find people that can't use Google these days to find the answers and separate the wheat from the chaff that you find out there. I would say that people to be aware of things that they potentially don't know. People that have blind spots, try and ask other people in your team. That if you've got a team full of people that are all the same, you're going to have group blind spots. So try and compose that security team of people with different skill sets, different functions, different ways that their minds operate. And if you can do that, you'll cover a lot of blind spots. So have the ability to leverage the team within your own organization. Secondly, specific websites, be aware of control frameworks, such as obviously the NIST cybersecurity framework has great documentation out there, and some it is like War and Peace, but if you can navigate around it effectively, there's some brilliant information there. CIS controls, CIS benchmarks, excellent resources of a quick snapshot of how an organization should be doing things for a specific requirement for security. Deconstructs it really well. I would say ISO 27002 is also very much like the cybersecurity framework. It's enormous. When you open the PDF, the slide on the right hand side shrinks, and it fills you with dread. How am I going to find this information within there? But there is great information in there about most aspects of information security and how an organization may choose to implement the major elements. It's very much a handrail for that type of information. So I think between those 4 aspects, using Google, NIST cybersecurity framework, looking at 27002, if you can get a copy of it, your department may have to buy it, but it's only £200 or less than that. We provide it because we're associate consultants with BSI, so we often provide a discounted copy for clients. And then CIS controls. And with those kind of 4 different areas, I think you can pretty much find out anything.
Okay. And last question then, if there was like a junior or someone in the company who was getting into security, if there was one training, I suppose exam or credit he had, what would you advise him to kind of go on to and start out with?
Oh, there's a foundational course that we put people through. I'm struggling to remember the name of it, but it's something like Certified Information Security Professional. It's not CISP, because if you put a technical person through CISP, there's no point. They won't see the benefit of it. GRC person, yes, but not technical person. So I think different functions will have different courses that they can go on. But I would say a robust foundational course, like what's it called, Sec Plus. I think that gives you a pretty good broad foundational knowledge about security. Doesn't go into the GRC elements very much, and a lot of security is GRC. Okay. So, and I think some of is it the British Computer Society that has one as well, which is a very good foundational security course, but very much less so from the technical domain and much more in the governance, risk and compliance domain.
I mean, from my perspective, I would advise anyone to when they're looking at breaches or anything that comes out, actually go and read them, look at some history behind it, look at some literature around it, actually read it rather than just read the summary. Look how it's actually exposed. You start then creating some foundations around what these different attacks mean, how they're considered. It's just good to get a bit more aware of it, of things that keep getting pushed to us from. I mean, if you imagine from a networking perspective, there's always security vulnerabilities, but maybe sometimes we don't read into them enough to actually understand what they're actually saying. But look, thanks, Matt. What we'll do now, I guess, we'll probably take this off, edit it, and then we'll send it out. I think I think it's good. Maybe what we should do is we just before, but that whole, there's a lot of questions that come up, after we've done something like this, from,
Yes.
I guess, people saying, how do I get into this training? What if, all of those things. I know I don't usually do that, but I get more people just messaging me about, what do you recommend for training? And I was thinking, well, these calls are not for that, but maybe it's something that we can do once, just for,
Yeah, I would say for training is anything to do with information security management principles. So I just had a quick look on Google there, and they've got the BCS has the foundation certificate in information security management principles. So that's a good foundational one. There's another one which is,
is there a book, for example, that you would recommend?
no,
or a study book?
No, I don't think so. I think they're too long-winded books.
Yeah.
I think these days the audience, books are good for reference. IT books, typically, they're not bestsellers. So they're never Tom Clancy's. They're just not designed that way, but they're brilliant as references.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say books really. I'd say something with the certificate information security management principles, something with those kind of terms in the title will give you that broad view of security. And then you can go into your specific elements, your specific, I guess, functions, whether you're working in SecOps, incident response. If we looked at pen testing, we've got pen testers that work for us, and they do very specific, very deep training around security incidents and creating security incidents and finding vulnerabilities and checking those vulnerabilities are real, etc. And going into great detail, but that's a really tiny, narrow aspect of security. So therefore, you go down those very tiny, narrow aspects of training to be able to enable that narrow view, but very deep expertise and knowledge. So I think it very much depends on the role. Like if I look at the people that do incident response training in our organization for clients, very different type of personality type as well than the pen testing team. If I look at when we're doing ISO consultancy for 27001, for example, for an organization, our GRC consultants are a very different type of personality than the pen testers, that are very different from the incident response to the digital forensics people. They've all got very different personality types and very different training requirements too.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that's one for a topic next time. But thanks for bringing this at short notice.